Okay, that should be live. Should be good. Yep, everything looks fine. Okay. Ugh. Okay, so today is going to be a mess. Over the weekend, obviously, I was working on trying to get the application back up and running, and did some refactoring for the clean architecture. So yesterday we got that up and running again and flowing. So events were flowing. And after stream, I decided to break it all again. She's not clever. So I need to decide if I'm going to commit to this path or I'm going to revert it and proceed with the application. And I think I'm going to commit to this path, is my instinct. The reason being, it's starting to break the application up into usable chunks, right? And because I didn't know what I was doing, which direction I was heading in, I didn't write the test necessarily for this. So the tests are all going to be broken. So today's stream is going to be about fixing up those tests and making sure they're covering what I want to cover. It does allow me to make more granular changes. It does allow me to verify workflows. So I'm thinking it's a positive change. So let's go on to register a user with provider, because this one is also going to change in so much as my tenant management component, and I'll come back around in a second on why I chose to do this yesterday. User, register user with provider. I'm going to do it this way. So, yesterday after stream, I realized that I need to use registered tenant user. And registered tenant user now didn't have the information necessary in here because I used to pass password in. No, I used to create a tenant user. And yeah, there wasn't enough information available in here either way. So what that left me with was another need to have a different case for tenant user. So I decided to approach this slightly differently and say, hey, can I break up the application enough that my workflow... So I started looking into clean architecture and what the kind of general rules are around how to define what is clean, essentially, right? And it's kind of... it's open-ended, basically. Obviously some people will have opinions on what is and isn't right. But basically came down to one of the rules was single repository, single handle sort of thing, right? So if you're doing something, then you should only inject one repository and that work should be focused on that repository and nothing else, right? So you shouldn't be doing multiple things in a handler, which I was in some cases, right? Register tenant was actually register the tenant with the address. So now I broke out register tenant, which now registers the tenant. It gets the address ID that we've attached, that we've created, to verify it doesn't exist. So the problem here is now I create an address before I create a tenant. So that might change. But registering an address is literally creating an address. And I attach some events to these things just to try and start to expand how I'm going to use these things. An associate address with tenant is an action, right? That is, literally, actually that can go away at this point. Go and pull the address and then associate it with the actual tenant ID. So I'm really using this chance to experiment with ideas and opinions on how I should be doing this clean stuff, right? If I'm gonna follow some of these patterns or some of these guidances, then I'm gonna make sure I'm understanding them as I go. So actually, what I might do in the next week or two is kind of come up with a sample project and build from scratch a clean architecture version of it, so I can learn some of these lessons ahead of time. Because if I keep learning them on my main application, I'm going to get frustrated at refactorings and I'm going to break things and I'm going to introduce new bugs. So yeah, it's going to be a challenge not to do that. Sorry, I keep fidgeting. My chair slides back and falls off the edge of my mat. So yeah, I'm going to do the register stuff. Of registering the provider with the provider, because right now what that is it is doing a little bit too much. So I'm going to make it an actual action that I can invoke and then see how that feels. So what we're going to do is we're going to do, who am I kidding? Let's just use a primary constructor. I use a registry, and then what we're going to do is we're going to say, await that, async that, and then we're going to do, let's call it command. I much prefer calling it command. So all these become parameters, so this should still string provider ID. No, that's not how I use it, but okay. Register tenant workflow. Yeah, because if we're looking at use cases now, this starts to get a little bit messy in terms of, okay, there's some organization in here that I don't now agree with, so I want to understand a little bit more about that. So GUID user identifier, GUID tenant identifier. Not sure where provider ID came from, but we'll figure that out. User identifier, tenant identifier. Okay, so, but this needs to be something different. So var existing equals user registry dot. Okay, so find user by email is not there. That's the problem there. This needs to be public. Refactor. Okay, pull members up. I use registry. Okay. So this becomes find user by email. Really? It's all broken. Good morning, Canny. Oh, good afternoon for you. How are you doing? Oh, there's a problem with that. Okay. How are you doing? Right. Okay. So that's because that's not accessible. So we need to do user exists with email. So we need to change that a little bit. So that shouldn't be public. I find I'm still flash from yesterday. I slept very bad because, yeah, 4 a.m. sleep and all those thoughts. Yeah. You had a crazy stream yesterday. That was really nice to see. So, yeah. I'd love to say I've been there, but no, I haven't. It was, I mean, I've had big raids, and I know that that gets very nerve-wracking, especially when they raid as you're doing something kind of not engaging or things aren't ready to show. Much harder for you because it like the visuals are kind of the thing that you're working on and stuff. So, but yeah, find user by email, await async, cancellation token, is not null. Yeah, you got a lot of stuff done, and that was awesome to see. What am I doing? I'm breaking things. So, I'm kind of leaning into the clean architecture thing a little bit more to explore, right? So, after the stream yesterday, I realized that I had one more refactoring to do. And it was, I used the same handler to register a new user, which right now isn't necessary, but this is the ability for a someone who creates the app to add another member to the group, right? So this endpoint was there, and this wasn't going to work because I was now missing information. So I decided to go back and reflect on things and see if I could change things up again, because as I was moving forward, I realized that I just created another issue in that I now made it so that my identifier that I'm attaching to my user is now not recognized everywhere. So I could either pass around two identifiers, right, or find some other way of making sure I can register things in the right order. So I went down another path of trying to find out how would people do this with clean code, with clean architecture, not clean code. I mean, one and the same really, but how would people do this? Because I now have several processes that are kind of independent, but wrap up into one larger process in this event and wrap up into smaller processes in other events, right? So these are kind of my use cases, I suppose. But a use case doesn't necessarily go one-on-one with a command from what I'm learning. So there's some advice that says, okay, well, if you've got a repository and you're doing something, you should have one repository, one action for that repository. You shouldn't be adding multiple repositories into. I think a dog's about to go back. Let's see if he settles again. But you shouldn't be adding multiple repositories into one handler all the time and doing many things. So my registered tenant used to do create the address, associate the address, and add the actual tenant record. So I kind of flip things on the head a little bit, but now I kind of associate the address. Yeah, all this is async stuff. It's just a pattern, right? It's just because this stuff uses async, which means I have to use async all the way. You're kind of committed once you start doing async, unfortunately. Much of it doesn't work asynchronously. It's really synchronous. It can work asynchronously. I think the problem with the .NET stuff is the patterns kind of now you can wait on stuff in a sync way. Yeah, because most of this it's just blocking, right? But it's all synchronous essentially. So every time I do this, right, I'm actually just waiting. Nothing here is happening in parallel. It's just the resources it gives back. If it's a long running process. Yeah, that one. Okay, so is user registered? User exists with email. I technically have this already because I have his user registered, which is better. And the facade pattern would maybe help when you really want to do everything as you would need custom transaction handling. Yeah, I mean, the way this code is, well, there's a lot more missing than a comma. Oh, sorry, from that, yeah. When the facade pattern would help, maybe help you really want to do everything async, you can need custom transaction handling. Yes, okay. That are two sentences. Right. So in this instance, nothing's really asynchronous. It's just a pattern that I'm forced to follow because the underlying library that I'm using is all built around that concept because you don't know what you're going to use, right? So most of it is awaited. If I had long running processes here, then yeah, they wouldn't be awaited. They'd be I'd let them run and complete. But right now, what I have learned recently is this causes a bit of chaos if you're trying to lock things. So Sito, in his code, was having some issues with using lock, right? And what I've learned is this and this don't necessarily fit well together because the way that it does resource management when you're doing async stuff, it's not always in the right sequence. The resources aren't available for the lock. So that's why the semaphore slim might be a better option for Sito. So I've just put that method on there, but I also have is user registered, right? Which takes my command.user identifier. So if I'm going back to this, I can use that, right? Because is user registered literally is a similar call, go to implementation, which is get user by identifier, which is actually better because now I know that that user exists. So I think I'm going to take out, for right now, we're going to remove that one. Go to implementations, because we don't need it, right? I'm not leaving an API in there. Technically, command is kind of a transaction. Yeah, kind of. We're going to get to that in a second. If existing, do I want? Well, I need to await that. Everything's asynchronous. See, these are HTTP requests, right? So that's good practice because it will .NET will manage that request differently than if you just make it all synchronous in terms of blocking and whatnot. It will let some resources go as far as I understand while it waits for that request. So that's healthier. Return result. I don't think this is a conflict because it doesn't matter this just matters that I've registered it. So success, there's no success message concept. So actually this is really just if not existing, return result dot success. I don't need success with a message because there's no benefit in knowing that it yeah. Let's be explicit there. If user is already registered, and we return. So the benefit of doing this, so what I was doing there was adhering to some more principles in the fact that this was actually checking this, right, essentially. But that should just do what it's asked to do. So being a little bit more strict there. So I'm just kind of going through and really evaluating what I really want to do with this stuff. So I've made lots more commands, but now I have a problem of organization because they kind of cross over here, right? This registered tenant workflow is referring to things in the user and it's referring to things in the tenants. So my need to kind of organize this by use case is starting to get stronger. And I'm feeling the mess of organization. So registered tenant workflow. This gets a little harder to now piece apart. So register address, we'll create an address. When we've registered the address, we now create the tenant, which is kind of a bit backwards because now we've logged an address, we've saved an address in the tables that we might never use. This will save it all the time, right? So the same address being entered will create multiple records. That's a problem for later. We need to know about the address because we need to say, okay, you're registering the same company, right? So if the address exists, right, if we've already registered address and for that company on that tenant, then this already exists. There's no. That's how I'm determining unique. We register the tenant and then we go and associate that address with the tenant, right? On the success of that. This pattern is going to get really old really quick because each one has this kind of yeah, and I kind of now see. So I looked at no, we don't want to bring that up right now. That's my game library. No one needs to see that. That's a whole different stream. Railway oriented programming. So I brought this up the other day. Oh, my eyes. And error or success, right? The happy path. And this is kind of that, right? Everything is an error or a success. So success goes forward, error branches off and comes away. Right? So I don't think there's actually any specific implementation. I'm still not entirely. Functional approach to the execution of functions sequentially. I'll be using error handling as a case study here. Apart from error handling, there are various other applications for railway-oriented. Morning, Delta, by the way. But if you look, this is exactly that case, right? It's success or fail, success or fail, success or fail. Every single one, if it fails, it dives out. So now, yeah, if so, again, var tenant user equals, right? If not tenant user dot success, return result dot conflict. I'm only following the pattern now just to keep on with the idea. So now var so mediator.send new register user with provider dot command. I'll just fill everything in. Ugh. Okay. And herein the problem. Herein lies the problem. So what I've been going through is back and forth over what I need to pass around here, right? Do I need to look things up? Do I need to pass GUIDs, right? And this is kind of troublesome. So right now I'm not really using the eventing, right? So I'm not actually publishing many events. I've added a few events just for the sake of adding them, just to learn, just to kind of stretch my mind a little bit as to how they might work and what they might mean. But in general, what I've been doing is going through this code, and this is kind of the workflow. Because again, I looked at this as far as what would people do in terms of clean architecture, right? What would they do if we broke these all up into little pieces, right? How do you do something like this, right? This is too much for one handler, right? And again, some people are like, oh yeah, you just send the commands. But then if you look at the advice of how to use mediator patterns properly, sending commands from within a mediated command seems poor. You should only publish events from within a mediated command, right? If we're following that advice. So no matter what, I'm going to land on someone's bad side here in how I'm going to approach this. So my goal is to break up all the pieces that I need so that no single command is doing two things, right? Which, again, because I did not know which path I was going down here at all, I did not write the unit test for this, so my unit tests are completely broken, but it will mean that I get to reassemble them and test all the things I was missing the first time. But what approach I took was, okay, well, I'm going to break everything up so that no one thing is doing too much, and I'm going to send from my workflow, I'm going to send everything. So the workflow is kind of the coordinator. This is the one that can break the rule because it's not actually mediated itself, right? It kind of follows a similar pattern, but it's not mediated. That doesn't log in his user registry. Is that, does that refactor all them? It does, thanks. So that's why I was thinking about this railway oriented thing, because I saw some code in one of Milan's videos. He's like, just ignore that, that's railway oriented programming, that's for a different video. So he's got a video coming soon on that, but this now kind of makes sense because this is exactly what I'm doing here, right? I'm going down a workflow of success or fail, and fail is a bailout in every single case, right? And it's just repetitive. But anyway, back to my problem. So I was going back and forth over what do I send as an ID, right? Do I send the integer, right? Because in here, now I've saved it, I can send the integer. Or do I send the identifier? Do I send the GUID back? Because I need different things at different times, right? So register tenant, I have an integer, and I use that integer to pass into register tenant user. Yes, because I pass the IDs into this one, which avoids looking up it avoids lookups on those two records inside of register tenant user. So I don't now need to do two queries. I can just say, okay, create a record for this tenant user. If I change register user back to GUID, then this becomes a lookup. But this becomes easier, right? Because, you know, now I don't need to go and get the user and the tenant identifiers. If I pass these in as IDs, I now need to put these in as lookups. So is lookup my common pattern there, which means I need to inject I repository of user and I repository of tenant, which then flies in the advice of other people like, no, you shouldn't inject more than one repository in a single handler. So it's great to say you should not do this, but in practicality, in the real world, what am I doing, right? Well, the repositories are, yes, in so much as they are generic. They're not. There's no actual strongly typed repository. You won't find anywhere in my code that says there's a user repository or there's a tenant repository. So there's another way of doing that, right? I could get around it, and I have done it in another place. Watch. If I do I repository of tenant user, right? Var result equals await tenant user repository dot single default async new user and tenant, right? I have a reverse. I could reverse this one, right? Nope. No, we're not getting into aggregates. So because I have a tenant and I have a user, I could potentially look up the IDs using one repository, because I could start from tenant user and create a specification that reaches out to both. And I've done that in that spec, right? Which doesn't feel nice at all, because I have user and tenant identifiers. So this result is so that I can publish an event, right? It takes in those two fields and gives me back the identifiers of them. In a sufficiently large code base, what you're doing now explodes the dependencies. Explodes the dependencies is what you want here, I think. Right, but I don't have a definition of a repository. There is no repository. So what you're saying is, because I need it, I should cheat and create a class that is tenant management repository that does all the things to all the things. It's just deferring the problem. Yeah. Well, I don't have but again, I don't have 100 repositories, right? That's specifications library, okay, doing that for me, right? All I do is define iRepository of DB set, right? If I go back to the actual context, right? That's my context, right? That is the only definition I give of a repository in this part of the system. Right? And if we go into repositories, right, we get into that whole world of, yeah, so now I have a single table. And that's what allows me to inject iRepository of T, right? If I create tenant management repository as an actual thing that has methods on it, etc., we get into that whole world of, we get into a whole different level of judgment of, well, DB context is a repository, or DB set is a repository. Because that's the argument normally, right? DB set is actually a repository. So I'm not going to please all sides in all ways, right? That's the truth of this, right? Again, that's why I don't try and follow architectures too tightly, because the practicalities are you're always going to break someone's rule. DB context naturally becomes just a single aggregate that represents tables that relate. Yeah. So you're always going to upset someone in this process, because someone is going to have an opinion on how something should be done. So again, that's where the pragmatism comes in, right? Write the code that makes sense. Write the code that is clean and reusable and maintainable. Maintainable over reusable. Yeah. No, I know. But how do I avoid that problem, right? I'm going to go down this path, right? Maybe I haven't experienced the thing that I need to experience here. Yeah. So how do I fix it, right? How do I fix that in an effective way while still developing code? Well, okay. So again, I'm not. this is my concern, right? I'm not making aggregates right now, right? And this is why that I hate this word, right? But I'm just trying to follow that clean architecture sample so that it's easy for people to see, right? I'm sticking away from DDD. These are not aggregates. These are base entities, but they're not aggregates, right? So if you look at the clean architecture examples, it's kind of a stark contrast, right? So if I look at clean architecture, Ardalis, and I look up clean architecture Jason Taylor. Okay, so you look at this example, right? And entities, right? We have exceptions, events, etc. Now you look at our Dallas example and core infrastructure use cases web, right? So he's calling domain use cases. No, he's calling application use cases. Core is domain, right? Both clean architecture, both apparently, both apparently good examples of it, but both wildly different, right? Now he deals with aggregates, so he's bringing in DDD into clean architecture, right? This guy stays away from it and just does domain events, right? So this person's not doing DDD, but calls this domain. This person is doing DDD, but doesn't refer to domain. And also he does something slightly different here. So core infrastructure use cases web, right? So this is his presentation. This is his application, infrastructure and domain. So I understand aggregates. So how do I? We actually went through an exercise once, and actually with Udi Dahan, who is end service bus guy, right? And we were talking about service, right? So when you're doing field service, right, there's a concept of a service, and it's a really overloaded term, right? What is a service? Right, we got deep into this conversation because we had a table called services, right? A service was everything; it was all things to all things, but it was one table. So we naturally created an object called service. But the discussion went around the lines of what is service, and what does it mean to service, right? So we ended up with there is no service. Service is a bunch of concepts lumped together. So it's kind of an aggregate, right? You can start a service, you can finish a service, you can update a service, you can reschedule a service, right? It's not really an aggregate. Well, so we didn't end up with it as an aggregate, right? We ended up with it as a saga, which completely blew our minds, right? Because then it's like it's not a thing. It's still not a thing, right? But it is never. It is not one object, right? An aggregate is a concept that is joined together. It's actions and data that constitute a single thing. Saga is an OOPAN. Service is an OOP stereotype. What do you mean an OOP stereotype? I need to know what you mean by stereotypes. Mm. Seems like a appropriated term. It comes from UML, not from OOP. Okay. Oh, you're not in cookies. I've not seen the term stereotype used before. and it comes from UML. It's a categorization. Morning, Sarav. I haven't read an OOP book in years. But again, the concept. Yeah. But again, the general concept was the fact that so he has a contributor aggregate, right? It's an entity-based aggregate root. And you can set a phone number and update a name on it. Because a contributor has nothing if it doesn't have contact details, but contact details is separated from it. So yeah, same concept, yeah. So this is the difference. This is the difference between all my development experience coming from doing stuff and understanding after the fact and applying terms after the fact. If I've not studied something specifically and seen it, I don't pick it up. So the word stereotype, that's not. It's why I don't pick this up very quickly. It's because I have to do it and see it and then learn the lessons, right? So knowing things can hinder you, basically. I think it's like design patterns, right? I choose not to try and apply a design pattern. I let them show organically, because if you try and fit something to a design pattern, you're going to make it fit. It might not be a good fit, and that's kind of what my point is here, right? It's I can make things fit, but should I? But you will do. You will do. You'll see them. Eventually, you'll start to see them appear, right? And it'll be apparent that there's an option. So what I do is I approach software development from a few angles, right? And hopefully it's been apparent over years of watching me do it. But I start with, what do I want, right? What do I want to see? And then I build enough to make it work. And then if I build it again and see the same pattern appear, I apply, okay, what is the commonality here? What can I change? Why do I need to repeat this? And if I repeat it a third time, I do something about it, right? Is a general goal. And sometimes the pattern fits. Sometimes you can see, okay, I can see a strategy there, or I can see, whatever pattern there, right? But I don't go looking for the patterns. I don't have these diagrams in my head that I go, this fits this perfectly, right? I just kind of write the code and see how it goes, and enjoy doing it, right? I think that's the thing you've got to do. Software development, if it starts to feel just right, just tapping away at a keyboard, yeah, and that's my worry. That was my worry with doing this refactoring to this clean architecture style. Was worried because I'm like, I'm losing choice. I'm losing the ability to decide what I do. But yeah. So you regain it back. I'm starting to realize that, because I'm starting to realize that I'm about to conflict with one group of people or another group of people or another group of people. I now get to put my own spin on it, because I'm going to conflict with somebody no matter what I do in this point. I can't avoid it. So initially what I did is I made these return the object. right? And then I realized I can't do that. You can't do that, but that would be an easy thing to do. So in my original design, that wasn't necessary, but it's so easy now because I can actually bleed the domain right up into my presentation layer. And that's what that would do. It would risk, because again, I'm using my registered new tenant user from here. So if that returns a tenant user, I don't have any adaptation there. I don't have any control. So I'm bleeding my domain straight up into my presentation, which feels bad. So I stopped myself doing that. But now I'm in this world of, do I return? When do I return and what do I return? Right? If it's events, I cannot publish IDs in events because the IDs are not known at that point. We don't actually care about that one. So yeah, I'm stuck a little bit here in terms of what do I do here. I never constructed events in hexagonal architecture. So I will say things start to make a little bit more sense now I've done it this way, right? Things start to seem a little bit more easy, right? So if I put events on things, right, I get lots of free behavior, right? I can actually put in behaviors, middleware behaviors for Mediator, and I can actually start to monitor events. So I can see, oh, a domain event went through. Okay, what domain event was it? Okay, here we go. We can actually report metrics on that. So now I can actually metricize my application without interfering with my code. I can log that, right? I can do all sorts of cool stuff. And it's possible now because this is now publishing things that it wasn't doing before, right? I'm actually putting out things happening in the system. So I kind of see the benefits of doing it this way. And also now I can't change. I can change an entity, right, from different handles. Different handles could have different things, and I know that the event's going to get published because I'm going to put a method on my entity. So kind of blending that world of the aggregate with the entity, right? I'm just using base entities here, but I can put an action on an entity to say, okay, update the last, update something, pass it the data it needs, it does what it needs, and then publishes an event that it did it, and now I'm just hooked into that by default. So I can definitely see the benefit in doing this eventing. So I think what I'm going to do, and I said this to Sarav last night, is I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of create a sample project. I'm going to create my version of these two, right? But I'm not going to use it as a demo. I'm just going to use it as an actual working practice set, build it out, and then maybe I can share that. Well, I will put it into the public repo, but maybe I can share that, and you guys can have a hit. You can have a go at it, put your own spin on it, see what you feel you would do differently, sort of thing. Just to kind of learn from. But that way, I can't afford to keep doing this in this application, right? Otherwise, I'm never going to make progress, right? I have to make some hard decisions at some point and move forward with it. But in the same, I now kind of want to practice it, and a practice application would be the better option. I've just got to come up with some relevant domain that is useful. I don't want to do to-do list, right? They both did. I think they both essentially did a to-do list. You just added contributor. That's the only words we contributors. Expense reports. Maybe we do it. So yeah, right. Yeah, maybe. But you can see here, even two experts in clean architecture, right, have very differing opinions as to what this is more pure, right? This is the pure image, right, with all the dependencies pointing the right ways. This isn't as pure in terms of its visual. It's pure in its implementation, right? But this also blends in DDD because it blends in aggregates and it blends in other things, not just event sourcing. Because aggregates, event sourcing, they all just bleed. It's just there. Cool. Now, how's that developed? That really just take over my... No, that took over that screen. The main service should be application service. Okay. Well, I think that's the path we'll go down. We'll look at something and develop a demo app. Is that meant to be clean architecture? That one? I didn't look yet. I'll look at it afterwards. But is that intended to be clean architecture? Is that going to be like hexagonal, or because you do more development through those styles? Just from my learnings reading books. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna fix this. I gotta fix this. So do I? You know stuff I don't at this point. We'll find that out, right? I think this is the biggest. It's not necessarily a struggle stream. I'm not struggling here. Um, it's just I understand why I'm doing things, and I've had some. That makes sense. That would make that much easier, right? I've had those moments because I can see the benefits, but um, I'm still frustrated at the fact that even though there's an implementation of this to look at, even though there's something out there that does give an example, they still all contradict things, right? There's always contradictions in here, and I've got to pick my contradictions. And I think that's a struggle for a lot of new developers, right? If you're looking at this and trying to implement it purely, right, you're going to make a mess because you're going to struggle, right? So I've got to make that decision, right? You understand how better our bound and context talk to each other more. Well, we'll see that. I need to make sure I keep pushing my. That work? Yeah, it does. So here's a decision I've got to make, right? And this is kind of where I'm at. Do I standardize? Do I say that when I create something, I will always return the ID of that in the system? Or do I say when I create something, I will always return the identifier of that in the system? So let's go down the line, right? This returns a GUID. Let's make it return ID. Let's see if we can align this and what challenges it gives us. Right. So that creates the address. One thing I am contemplating, I'm off to work. Good luck. Look. Thank you, Dota. And yeah, we'll look soon. This guy has a good playlist on architecture. Are you posting a link, Sarav? you want, you can post it in Discord, which means that it's shared with other people. So let's make that happen. Okay, so we're returning an ID there, which means that our registered tenant now takes an ID, right? Registered tenant takes int address ID, right? So that's int address ID, not identifier. I don't know if that's a good pattern. It reads well, but I know that I technically have those privately available, so it works. Okay. So now we need we need to pull the address. That's not even a question. Would YouTube not let you post a link at all? Interesting. It didn't even tell me. Do I get any administration ability on YouTube? I don't really have much screen space to play with. Nope, I get no admin ability though on YouTube, and no indication that you were trying to post something. This is who I think it is. Yes, I think I know who this is. Is that actually opening a link anywhere? So that is we're gonna visit a site, or we're gonna just keep saying we're gonna open it. That is what's his name? I don't know his name. Apparently my computer will not open links anymore. Yes, Amichai Mountain Band. Yeah, so he actually just did a course for Nick Chapsas as well. So you can actually see his stuff on that. He's a well-renowned expert, yeah. So my challenge here is obviously if I keep watching videos and reading books and stuff of people, well, for me that's really difficult. My brain doesn't work that way, so I struggle to sit and watch vast amounts of content, and because I either want to sit there and apply it, or I'm waiting for the pieces that I don't know, right? Because again, I've got to the point where I've taught myself enough that I'm dangerous, but yeah. So it's kind of difficult to watch some content. Okay, so we're going to do that. We're going to create a constructor. No. Yes. Int ID. And then we're going to do query.where a goes to a.id equals ID. Right. So we're going to create that spec in our register tenant. Now we're going to do address by ID spec, and that's going to take address ID. You're going to make that I single result specification. I don't know. That puts in some behavioral differences, I think. So now that's functioning, right? So we've got that working again. So that returns an ID. Next, now associate address with tenant. This accepts a GUID. So let's now make that take an int. And that's going to be address ID. Let's see what that has. Okay, so address by ID spec. We can now use that again. Right, so again, we were pulling the address anyway by its GUID or its whatever, because we need to make sure we have the address. Although actually now we don't. right? Because now we've created it, so now we don't need that. Command.address ID. So that removes the need for that repository, which gets us down to one repository there. Let's move down the line. Okay, so now we create a user. We have no need for that. Then we register the tenant user using the tenant's ID. Then we move down to user registered, where we need the user. So here, register user with provider, int. So if we pass in, yeah. Now here's where we hit an issue. Yeah, actually, sorry, I didn't do much justice there in that I didn't actually do. Let's create viewers up there. Create that there. Okay. Gotta do some maintenance of the old Discord, I think. Yeah, that was me asking Bard about what it thought about clean architecture. So now we have a challenge, right? Because now we have two IDs, but we need to register. We need to build it off the user identifier and the tenant. So what does this look like? So this is, we've got a fully intact user in our system. Now let's register the user. So the reason I did this is because this puts it back to having us controlling the user identifier, right? If we leave auth0 to control the user identifier, that gives me a challenge in that then I have to pass other things around. If I do this and this works, all my ticketing stuff still works, right? None of that needs to change at all right this second. I can make those changes to do the clean architecture layout separately. So how do I do this? I think, as much as I don't want to, I have to put the lookups in here, right? Put them in there. This feels like this should never be doing lookups. It should just be do a thing, do the next thing, with the result, do the next thing. This is kind of the railway piece. And I'd love to refactor this into something a little bit more meaningful. And we might actually attempt that shortly. But we got some unit tests to write. We got some other stuff to do before I even get to that part. So I think, as much as it's going to be painful, we pass in int tenant ID. And there we go. We don't have a squiggle there anymore, right? But now we do need two repositories. Repository of user, and repository of tenant. And again, I could cheat here, right? I could put in a tenant user repository and try and use some sort of quirkiness to get both, which would guarantee me that I have a tenant user configured, but I'm not going to mess around with that. So var user equals user repository dot single default user ID by spec. Query.where u goes to u.id equals user ID. Actually, let's be consistent there. I'm talking about user. Specification user, I single result specification user. Right. Let's move to folder. specifications, add it, dot single audio for async. It's funny, Copilot doesn't know a lot here. Var tenant equals tenant repository dot single audio for async. New tenant by ID spec. Command dot tenant ID. So pragmatically, I think this is a better choice. I think it's cleaner. I think it's simpler. Oh, didn't await them. And now that's user dot and tenant dot. Oh, so interesting. It knows that that's not nullable at this point. If user is null or tenant is null, return result dot invalid. Result dot critical error. User or tenant does not exist. So we can't register a user if we don't have a user and a tenant. Which makes sense. Okay, so with that done, with all that refactoring done, we have a problem. The code should, for regular code build, the tests are going to fail all over the place. Okay, so this one is the challenge. Register tenant user. This is now where I'm talking about use cases. This is not just register the tenant user, right? Because this is now a workflow essentially, right? It's a use case. So we do get into how do I want to do this? How do I want to lay this out? Because if you look, this is now kind of blurry, right? The commands do make sense in context of the thing they're talking about, but there's actual actions that trigger these, right? And that's this, really. What I'm calling a workflow there is a use case. Hey, George Smileyface. How are you doing? How's things? So what is the right way here? Is, I guess, where I'm going. Well, the right way is, if you've, you spend enough time with me right now, the right way is going to be the way that makes sense to me. Sorry. And the way that, the right way is going to be the way that makes sense to me and the way that keeps the code moving forward. Oh, I just realized it hasn't put my backdrop on today. It's done the cutting me out thing. Ugh. Why are you not doing that? Why are you not blurring my background? Everyone gets to see the mess. Show background. There you go. I need my green screen up. Those are games up to my side. I wish I could say I was smart enough that they were all books, but no, they're all video games. So this is kind of the reason I did this refactoring, to try and make sure I could address this properly. Because I have the same sort of problem, right? I have the password, and now registered tenant user doesn't take a password because there's a workflow involved, right? So there's a register the user, associate the user with a tenant, and then register the user with the provider. And yeah. Now this workflow might not end up being this way, but it's still. I'm going to try it. I'm going to do it this way. Register new tenant user. Workflow. Let's just go with workflow right this second. Again, I'm thinking of this from the use case, the actual usage standpoint. I don't like that. Nope. What do I want to write? Might seem kind of silly to look at it this way. So the user has an attached tenant, right? That's what this is, right? That's what the get tenant identifier does. It pulls the tenant identifier off the user. That gives me the ability to know who they're actually working for, right? I don't want to register the user with provider because that's a little bit too presumptuous. And it's not this user that I'm registering. I'm adding a new user to the system. Register new what am I doing? I'm registering a user additional to the tenant. I'm registering a new user. I'm adding again, you got to try and avoid the technical phrase here. You got to kind of try and find how you're going to refer to this in the future. Like how am I going to refer to this with the people that use the system? That's what I want to align to better. I don't want to align to insert into. You don't want to choose insert because they don't know what insert means. And because I'm building the system, my verbiage here is the verbiage that should carry through to the UI when I build it, and the verbiage that the users will use because that's what they'll be trained to do, right? So again, I want to align my way of building. Sorry, I'm just checking on puppies. So register new user. Register. It's not. Again, if I use the register word. So in this instance, this workflow now reaches out into several areas, right? So these are tenant focused pieces. These are user focused pieces, but this workflow lives at a different level. So I don't believe that should be there. I think that lives there. And workflows are my use cases. we'll come back around because it's not perfect, right? I'm doing that to think about it rightly. So now this refers to things in here and refers to things in here, right? The goal of this structure, from what I understand, in the way that Uncle Bob would want it written, is that it's the use case first. That was always the kind of description. You don't want to start with technical because you need to be able to think about the application in terms of how it's being used, not how it's structured, right? So if I ask you to go and look at how we register a user, then you should be able to get to how we register a user pretty quick. So register new user. Let's call it that for now. Let's see how it works. So this is going to be another workflow. So workflow is just my way of putting these chained events together, right? It's a cheat, and I know it's a cheat. Register new user parameters. So we're going to have public class parameters. We have execute the workflow, right? So the parameters we're going to need here are going to come from here. And we're going to need at least those three things. Register new user. So we're going to need public GUID tenant identifier. Public GUID. We're going to need something else as well. Originating user identifier. String email. String name. String password. That's going to be useful to have, right? We don't want to completely hide that fact. So now, from this perspective, we now don't need. We just need to inject our workflow. I don't think I've done it in a crazy way. We need register new user. We can talk about whether it's a workflow or whatever afterwards, right? So workflow.execute async, we await that. New register new user parameters. So let's start with email equals request.email. Name equals request.name. Password equals request.password. Yep, that works. And that works. So identity name. I thought I had an override for that one. Let's have a look. Shared identity, claims principal extensions as user identifier. Right, okay, that's it. And that's really weak because, again, Auth0 tends to put on extra pieces there. Okay, so that's our workflow. So anyone joining, if you are watching and wondering what I'm doing, if you have any questions, if you want to know more about what I'm doing, feel free to ask. There's no rule here that says I have to get this done. This is a personal project that I'm building with the intent that I would make it a real product if it works. So I am putting in every effort to get it done, but it doesn't mean I don't mind stopping and discussing. Okay. So we execute this workflow. We go in here. Now what do we do in here? So first we need to register a user. Then we need to assign user to tenant. Then we need to register them with a provider. Right? This is going to look familiar because it's exactly what happens in here, just less of it, right? So it's these pieces right here. That needs to change to be that. Right? It's those exact pieces. We need an I sender. We'll use the right term. So again, Mediator has the concept of sender and publisher for the purpose of differentiating between the two actions. You don't want to be publishing and sending in the same thing. An ad break is going to start. I need to trigger some of that automatically. So now we get to the world of, now we have GUIDs again, right? So now we're back into a painful world, right? This is why I'm doing this, right? I'm not doing this because I'm trying to be smart. I'm doing this because I'm trying to find the pain points and I want to make sure that I'm... So here we have a GUID and we need an ID. And here we have a GUID and need an ID. Other than that, it's working fine. Uh, it feels wrong to inject a repository into this because I can do it. I can do right if I inject I repository of tenant tenant repository, and then in here var tenant equals await entity by identifier spec tenant. Then we have tenant dot identifier dot ID. We have tenant dot ID. Right. So it works, but is it right? I think for being pragmatic, it does work. If tenant is null, return result.conflict. Tenant does not exist. Right. So it works, but I don't like it because now we're injecting these pieces. So yeah. Let's go with that for now. We're going to explore this more. This is not going to be the end of it, but it's more. I think the pattern is the client needs to do something, then the client really has a use case. And even if it's calling one command or sending one command, it's done within here and not within the actual API layer there. I don't know. Let's go and fix some tests in the remaining time today, because this is now totally broken. Okay, so let's build this slightly differently. So we have register tenant. We have a command register tenant and a use case for register tenant now, which is going to make things a little bit confusing. Luckily, it's not totally blocked. that brought that, because that now doesn't work. That's why. Ugh. This is one big game of push and pull today. So I'm going to leave that alone for right a second. Unit tests, unit tests, unit tests. We need concerning register tenant. The naming gives me issues. It gives me naming conflicts here. This command gives me a conflict because now I have a use case and an action that are, or command, that are doing very different things. Register a new tenant. You're registering a tenant. You're not registering a new tenant. You're registering a tenant because that's the workflow, right? You're not actually, calling it new when you're talking about it. But the actual record itself is called a tenant, right? So there's more to just. Am I registering a tenant or am I registering a company? Remember what I said about the naming? I'm not registering a tenant. This is not. Is it a company? Is it an organization? Organization. That use case is registering an organization. which means endpoints register, post. Yeah, I don't talk about tenants there. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. Hi, Kenny. You alright? What's that? Oh, look. Thank you for the look, Kenny. I appreciate it. Okay, so that starts to clear things up, right? It's called an organization, right? So I'm registering an organization, not a tenant, right? So if you start disconnecting the underlying technology from the actual concepts themselves, right? An organization is more than just a tenant. It's a tenant with an address, with users, with all manner of things, right? It's going to have boards and teams and everything. Everything's going to spawn from organization, but we have individual records. Okay, that starts to feel good. Okay, I'm good with that. So let's call that register organization. That's our use case. Let's go with, so here's what I'm going to do. We're not going to know that we've made positive changes until we actually get these passing. But these are not going to pass because the code is all broken for them. So what we're going to do is we're going to cheat for a second. We've got to make sure we come back and fix these things. We're going to comment out every single test so that we can get a build. Once we can get a build, we can start adding new unit tests and reinforce the system again. But these facts are not necessarily incorrect independently. They're just broken from a code organization standpoint. Okay. There's also one other thing I want to test eventually on here, and that is this. Can I do something like that? Actually, if user registered is success, can I do something like that? It actually would be that return result.conflict, and can I roll back? That's what I want to test that. So we're gonna leave that in there for now. Because if that works, that's awesome. Because again, those events won't publish until they're saved to the database. So if they're transactionally bound, then it might not trigger that. And those events would roll back as well. Right? So yeah, we're going to have to investigate whether that works. Because again, if any of this fails, but it saves things along the way, then it's a big mess. So we're gonna test this. But anyway, that's a whole different problem. Okay. Tests. We're gonna do this. Shared. New project. Right, break shared out as its own. I do. No, I don't. Share kernel went there. Extensions went there. Source. Can't do that. Shared. Shared tests. I want to move that at this point to there. The renaming of all these namespaces is going to be challenging later on. Okay, that's just because that's there. One thing I'm learning as well while I'm streaming here is I've got a window right in front of me. And on a sunny day, I can't see anything. I'm gonna have to get a new monitor or something, or get a better shade. So they are closed. Okay. So that gets rid of that. Let's start with let's not start with that one actually. Let's start with the component pieces. Associate address with tenant. Concerning associating address with tenant. No, not a class. A directory. Concerning associating address with tenant. Okay, when address does not exist, so result is conflict. Okay. Can I do this by default? Hold on. Right, does it? Okay. So I just need to do public range at. Okay, so we need a subject. So our subject is our associate address with tenant is our subject. And subject equals new. And we have dot handler, sorry. This style does lead to a little bit of a mess there because you're not creating an instance. You are creating an instance of a class, but you're creating an instance of a nested class. So that styling does not really work cleanly all the time. We need a I repository of tenant address. Was that tenant address? Oh, there is no. It's just a happy path here. There is no when it doesn't not exist. That's previous code. So this is actually when associating address with tenant. There is no failure here. There's just a success. This goes up here. That goes away. If there's multiple cases, I'll put them in a folder. If there's not, I'll put it up at the top level. Associating address with tenant. We need a tenant address repository. Tenant address is created. I don't think there's an event. No, there's no events off this right this second. There's no need for any events. It's just a thing. I suppose if we were doing it correctly, it would be a value object of some form. Okay, so we need tenant address repository equals, yep, that's what we need. And then tenant address repository, pass that in. On the act, we need to just say, yep, that'll do. Dot get a waiter, dot get result. And then we just need to say tenant address repository dot did receive received dot add async arg dot is tenant address. Deflux, welcome. You made it with plenty of time to spare. How you doing, sir? Over const int. How was your weekend overall? I know we saw each other in streams, but I didn't really talk. Doing great, just saw that. I'm not sure. No? Address ID. Make sure we pass in. And here, just for fun, watch. This is actually a good demonstrator of why you should make sure you use different variables for testing. Be right back. No worries, sir. Okay, so this test will pass. Ta-da, it's working. But it's not. So if I change this, 1001, 2002, this test fails. Right? So it's more important that you use distinct variables, don't just use random numbers or single numbers, etc. Right? Otherwise you'll make it look like you're passing a test that you're not actually passing. When associating address with tenant address is created. That's the outcome of that. Ms. Ranhorn, Happy New Year. How was your weekend? Not bad, visited family. Oh, nice. Okay, so now register address. I'm registering an address. These are pretty much just backing up inserts. So arrange act, protected override, arrange, and act. Our fact is New Year, new stream schedule. We're going to try and do 8 to 10 p.m. my time during the week. Nice. Nice. Sorry, it's got weird out of the blue text. New year, new stream schedule. I'm going to try and do 8 p.m. Yeah, that's cool. That means I'll be able to catch some of your streams because karate is 819. That means I'll be able to join for the end of your streams. But yeah, getting back into a schedule definitely is helpful if you're going to stream, right? So. Okay. Address is added. This is kind of a silly test, but it does what I need it to do. That's what I'm trying to do. Yep. What's the schedule? Yeah. Maybe 2024 will bring the return of Deflux streaming. We can hope. We need more Blazor. What I am learning is streaming from the time period I am streaming. I wish I could stream for longer because the actual 7-9 is good, but people tend to join around 9, so like 10 would be better for me. 12-hour stream confirmed. I wish. Actually, on that topic, I think my affiliate anniversary is in May, and it would be my 5-year affiliate anniversary. And I was contemplating booking a day and just coding and doing a long streams. Obviously, with dogs, that would be not all dedicated to streaming. There would be some breaks, but yeah. But we'll see how that goes, because some of the changes might happen this year, unfortunately. Which would mess up my stream schedule again. I forgot to put to the doggo more content. No, I don't want to see that. Okay, let's get this finished up. I need to get this moving, unfortunately. So, our subject is our register address dot handler is our subject. So subject equals new handler, and that takes a repository. So let's make a repository. Private I repository of address. Address repository. Let's create our repository. Come on, Copilot. There you go. I'm getting a little lazy with that. I'm not sure I like it. Yep, that'll work. Let's make a variable for that. Nope. Let's make a field for that. Address line 1. Introduce constant. Introduce constant. Address line 2. Introduce field. Address sub locality. Constant. But yeah, I do think I want to do something. Again, I've been thinking about what I could do to make it more, more useful for those that subscribe. I want to do more there. I want to make more content for more interactive content as I build this product out. I want to make, I basically want to make a task board that, yes, you control, but use channel points to basically add add tasks in there and pop them up on screen and stuff. Do more interactive stuff that's more around the concept of the stream. Like I would still love to do more game stuff, like the game library stuff, but I think that this right now, the game library has no chance of going anywhere, right? There's plenty of products out there for tracking games. It's not like I'm going to build something there, but this has a potential that I really would like to explore. So what we're going to test here is address repository dot received dot add async, and arg.is address a goes to a dot line 1 equals address line 1. There we go. Let's run the test. Just to check, if we switch them out, right, make sure it's actually validating. Okay. The problem with writing tests after the fact is you really have to make sure that you are passing for the right reasons. So, yeah. Oh dear. So, okay, let me review what I've done today. So I have kind of turned my application upon its head over the last couple of days, right? I've changed how I'm building things. I've changed how I'm treating things. I've changed how granular I'm getting with things, right? It solves some problems, right? It creates others. I've switched to a clean architecture style. I'm going to take the style because, again, if we look at two large contributors to the concept, they differ even in how they build and how they name, etc. So clean architecture doesn't fit one pattern, it fits an interpretation. So what I've done is I've broken down my application, I've broken out my entities, and I've put events on these entities. So if I change an entity, it will publish an event, is the goal, right? So if I change an entity, I have a reason for changing the entity. If it should publish something, it can do. And all that's built in and will happen. I'm starting to look more into organizing by use case, right? Because the behaviors are not necessarily cleanly aligned with an object, right? So here I have tenants and users, but actually the use cases kind of transcend both pieces. Transcend? Is that even the right word? That sounds like some fancy. Transcend, to pass beyond the limits of a category or conception, for instance, to be greater than, as in equally or intense. I suppose transcend is actually kind of right in its purpose, in that register organization includes pieces from tenants and users, right? Because it needs to do multiple things. So organizing the code, I'm going to continue to reflect on this, keep going back and forth, fixing things, changing things, but it does make things cleaner. So register tenant used to do the address registration, then the associated piece of associating that record. So it was doing more than one thing other than just registering a new tenant. This now at least, it validates the address because it needs to know that it's going to, that it doesn't exist, but it will create a tenant, right? So actually, this is wrong. This is very wrong. Huh. So I have some methods, right? Does tenant exist with name? And does tenant exist, right? Does tenant exist takes all the address stuff. They call the same store proc underneath. But do I care? If the tenant exists with a name and I'm just creating the tenant, then it's going to exist. If I'm creating it with the same address, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. I mean, it's kind of unique on its name and address. That was always the purpose. But if it doesn't, if it, again, because you could have two, you know, Smith Plumbings LLC, right? You could have two of them. Yeah. Anyway, the point is I'm trying to rethink how to do this so that this is not doing more than one thing, right? It might need validation, but we'll get there. Register tenant user just creates a tenant user, right? It doesn't do more than that. And that's what I'm trying to focus on is using the feature of using the design to try and better describe my system. And again, thinking about things properly, right? I'm registering an organization here. I'm not registering a tenant. A tenant is a technical underpinning. I'm registering the organization, which I call a company. So I should probably rethink some of those words as well. So we're getting there. We've restructured it. You know, the dependencies are all in the right order. Events are firing. And we tested that yesterday before I started ripping this apart. Right now it's on the floor because obviously my unit tests are completely rubbish. But it does put it back. The focus of why I was doing this is because it put me back in control of the identifier that I published to Auth0, right? In the refactoring, because I took the eventing piece out of it, I couldn't use that identifier. But I've now rejigged that enough that I can use the identifier of the user, and it does mean that it's useful again. So I have the same user, which means my ticketing stuff isn't broken, because that was going to have to be refactored next. But anyway, it's 9:05. Unfortunately, I do have to walk two dogs before I start work. Well, not unfortunately. Not for them. I will return tomorrow. If you are in Twitch and watching and you are looking, thank you very much. You know, you're more than welcome to join the Discord. Too soon. Get up earlier. Come and join in earlier. All the videos do get posted to YouTube, and I do stream on YouTube at the same time. I don't know how. Yeah, sadly they won't let me do this for a living. No, I think Twitch for a dev streamer. There's only one person we know of that would be able to afford to live off that. So, thank you very much. I will return tomorrow, and yeah, we'll. Deflux, do you have anyone streaming that I can raid into that's actually streaming rather than my fail raid yesterday? You always seem to have like a Rolodex of streamers. All stacks streaming. Yeah, full stack is streaming. We could go raid full stack. Yeah, let's do that. Let's go raid full stack. Full stack is doing. He's always doing sorts of interesting stuff. He does a lot of DevOpsy stuff, so he's super knowledgeable. So thank you again for joining me. Appreciate it. I will return tomorrow, and yeah, thank you. Take care, all.